Welcome back to Mantle Mondays. My name is Amar Varma. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Mantle. I'm excited to have you on today, Rod. We've known each other for a long period of time. Your story is fascinating, ranging from, working on the original iPhone to what you're up to today. Excited to dig in and go for it. For folks meeting you for the first time, hopefully you can give us a quick background, quick snapshot, who you are and what's the arc that brought you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great to be here. Yeah, we've known each other for a while, but it's nice to finally be able to chat both to you, sort of organically about the story, but also things that maybe I wasn't able to talk about all in the past. So, the arc story that brought me here, maybe the quick headlines. I spent 5 years in management consulting. During that time, did some great projects, mostly in mobile. Built Disney Mobile Japan, which became a couple $1 billion business. Worked directly with Steve Jobs in building the iPhone business model in 2005, and so that set me off a journey around being in the mobile space, and started Localytics, which aimed to be a platform to help mobile apps grow their businesses. Over the course of 8 years, we grew that to over 25 million in revenue and profitable. Started a second company. Both Localytics and the second company were acquired. I eventually ended up at AWS as general manager of generative AI, where I left a year ago to start a third company, which we still haven't yet fully announced, but looking forward to doing so in the coming months.
Oh man, super exciting. We ran into each other at the airport not too long ago and figured we'd connect here, and you shared with me such a fascinating journey, and parts of it were especially fascinating. Let's kind of zoom in right on some of the stuff you were doing at a school, and then how it led into the business model of what we've been using for decades now.
Yeah, for sure. So, right out of school, I actually ended up at a robotics machinery manufacturer doing sales and marketing. A few years of that led me into my first software job, where I joined as a sales engineer. This was in the height of the dot com, sort of bubble, and that was a great journey. Once we saw the bubble sort of bursting, took that opportunity to go back to business school. After business school, went into consulting. I wanted to be in tech. So found, but didn't know exactly what I wanted to do yet. Had always wanted to start a company, but didn't feel like I was quite ready to do that. So joined a firm that was a consulting firm focused on tech, media, telecom, and through them got really deep, especially on the mobile space, working with companies around the world to help them build out their mobile strategies, particularly when they were looking to launch new mobile ventures.
Amazing. For all those listening, sales engineer is what we used to call an FDE for timing. Somebody who understands, product, software, and consulting all in one body. So it's super exciting. Uh, all right, well, let's talk a bit about you got thrown in a very interesting uh, gig for one of your consulting jobs in Cupertino. Maybe walk
Yeah.
through that whole process.
So when we started working with Steve and the Apple exec team, the iPhone was still a couple years from launch, and so it was super secretive. Well, they didn't need help from us for designing the phone or telling them, like, how to market it or anything like that. What they needed help with was the telecom side of it. That's where we were experts and they were not. So when we came in, they had already had the sort of the rough design of the phone. Not that they shared it with us in any depth, but they knew kind of where they were going. What they didn't know is what would be the business, right? Was it something where they were going to license a phone, to a carrier or to another manufacturer to market it for them? Is it something where they're going to build out cell towers and create a new phone company, or something in between? The flavor of the day back then was actually what we call an MVNO, a mobile virtual network operator, like a Virgin Mobile and others, where you lease space from the carrier. In working with them, we helped drive them to a different model that hadn't been done before, which maybe nobody else could do, but is partner closely with a telecom company and be the exclusive provider of the iPhone with them so that they could bring in new customers. And Apple would gain in the value that came from them gaining new customers. That was the model for the first, couple years at least of the iPhone, where we partnered tightly with Singular, which became AT&T by the time we launched. And they were the exclusive telecom provider for the iPhone, and it was a very profitable relationship, especially for Apple. Successful for AT&T as well because they gained a lot of customers who would have otherwise never come to AT&T.
Okay, so time setting for people, this construct from, you know, telecom side of incumbents having to share, whether it was wireline, long distance, broadband to now mobile carriers. I remember there was like Disney ESPN came into the game. It just became like such a fascinating thing to watch.
Yep.
Apple chose not to do it. They chose to partner with somebody, which is very interesting. I'm sure that was not a straight shot, smooth conversation. I'm sure there was some heated discussions and arguments. Anything you can elaborate on in this forum?
You know, one of the pieces there, the reason why we did it with AT&T is because they were the only ones that were sort of realizing that this world of paying $2.99 for a song download wasn't going to last forever. The other carriers were resisting it. AT&T, Ben Singular, and their CEO understood this and so engaged in this. But they worried that the iPhone wouldn't be successful, and AT&T was investing a lot alongside iPhone, alongside Apple, and they started complaining about the dynamics of the deal and other elements of it, and what would happen when if it wasn't successful. And in one meeting, am I allowed to swear on this? All
Sure.
right. So, Steve just was looking frustrated at these conversations, and he just stood up and said, "You know what? Just give them $1 billion of our cash, um, and if this doesn't work out, they can keep it, and that should shut them up." And so everybody's looking around and being like, "Was this serious?" And finally, their CFO Oppenheimer chimes in and says, "Okay, well, we could structure that as a bond." And he's like, "Fuck that! We have a $5 billion. This is 2005, right? $5 billion of cash in the bank. Just give them a fucking $1 billion and shut them the fuck up." Just the act of being able to come back to them with that type of posture, that we're good. We're good. We're not going to worry about all these little things that we've been fussing about.
I think there's a big lesson in there too, right? It's like when somebody just has a vision of how something should work, and
Uh-huh.
the details to get it done are always important, and it's like, you know, yes, no, issues we need to discuss, and there's issues that we can work together on, and there's issues where I'm going to steamroll you, right? There's
Absolutely.
this whole kind of construct, and in the moment, it feels like he gave them the opportunity to be like, "Are we going to collaborate, or am I going to steamroll you on this thing?" And people took the bait and said, "All right, we got it."
Well, it was that personal passion and commitment he had around his vision of this is just going to work and I'm going to make sure it works. And that's why, as a consultant, you don't see the CEO usually more than like maybe once a month, right? And yet we met with him multiple times a week because this was his baby. He wanted his hands on it. He wanted to make sure it came to fruition. And part of the reason it did is because those types of stances, right? And that type of commitment. And if it wasn't him being directly involved, you wouldn't have that ability to convince not just people internally that it was going to work, but the external world that this is going to work. And, there's something special coming.
Yeah, super interesting. I take a lot of lessons from that type of behavior, and having started our careers and worked in Silicon Valley for extended periods of time. It's just like the founder led discussions, the founder led vision, the founder led work has been something that's proven over decades to be the most valuable outcome. And it very much at that time flew in the face of professional management, right? And I think that's super interesting that all this time later you see that emerged as founder led. So very cool. Um, Before we move off this iPhone era, anything that you're excited that you see all this time later that's still there? You're like, yep, we worked through that.
There was a bunch of conversation back then about what made the iPod special. And it was sort of this, sort of this three-prong thing, the circular three-prong thing where you had the content producers, you had the hardware, but the thing that brought it all together was the software, which was iTunes. And it wasn't fully conceived then, but the fact that the App Store, which came a year after the iPhone was launched, became that same content, the software layer that brought content providers together with the hardware to make for a better user, seamless, stronger user experience was like amazing to see that being formulated, thought about strategically, and then put into action. Of course, even today, while it's not like the apps are the only thing and it's like completely killed the web or anything, but it's such an important part of how people engage with the companies and services that they trust.
There's 6 words that came from this era that I think are timeless, and it's the following: "There is an app for that."
Yeah.
I think that's, something that will stand the test of time, and for that whole thing, and very interesting. That's a pretty amazing story. Let's move on past that phase. What was next for you? You were the co-founder of Localytics, kind of when the App Store was kind of a bit of a wild, wild west. I remember we were doing apps at the time, and we'd be able to ring up the person running the App Store review, and it was one person, and then a week later they had more than one person, and then months later it was like this entire division because they didn't
Yeah.
expect it to be as successful as it was.
Yeah, we could look up the catalog of all the people who had published apps, and it was like, hundreds, company long list, and like, all right, let's go reach out to all of them. But, what did we do? Where my story went is I was still in consulting in 2008 when the App Store launched. I knew that there was something, I felt through the past I had that there was something special that could be here. And I thought about what was my biggest pain point. At that point, it was expense tracking. I hated doing expenses as a consultant. So I started building an expense tracking app. And while doing that in the summer of 2008, I started to go to tech events in Boston, talk to other people who were building apps, and what I started to realize is that, everybody was struggling with, the fundamental tools and platforms that every other space had, like the web. And, there might be an opportunity there. At that time, I also met my co-founders of Localytics, who were building another app. We decided to come together, and instead of going after the gold in the mobile app gold rush, to supply the pickaxes and shovels. I talked to VCs that made it sound like, hey, this is a fundable idea. I left my job. By this time, I was at Bain& Company. I left my job there on August 31st, 2008. 15 days later, Lehman Brothers collapsed. And so this idea of, being able to raise venture financing early to get going was not on the table. So we bootstrapped the company for the first couple years. Um, and that in the end ended up being a very good thing for us because lot of the companies that had raised venture financing had to go quickly off into some direction. And the thing back then was mobile advertising. So they all tried to become mobile ad networks. At the end of the day, that's not what the world needed, right? There are a few very successful ones, but the real value became in helping companies understand what was going on so that they could engage their customers better. So we veered towards more a tool for product leaders to understand their users, build a better app to engage them, and that became foundational to what Localytics was.
Yeah, I remember it was it Omar at AdMob. Everybody's trying to replicate the AdWords equivalent, pre-roll, post-roll. It was fascinating. It was that era where everybody was taking all of the stuff from the web and finding a use for it on a small form factor screen. which is generally what happens in one of these new developer paradigms. And then, you know, it took the camera, it took location to really kind of understand what it was in broad scale. And I'm sure through your analytics, you saw these trends coming super fast by usage and payments and all the other things that came with it. So, um, talk about your first customer on this. Who did you talk to first, and how did they jump on?
Our very first customers, right? They weren't paid customers. These were the free customers. We started a mobile developers meetup in Boston where, we got a bunch of these folks that were doing cool things to put us in, and we figured out the product. Over the coming months after that in 2009, we had, probably by the end of the summer, like almost 1,000 apps using us, but all for free. And so it takes us to August-ish of 2009. And then we assumed that we would do a freemium model where the next product would be, again, $100 a month. Then down the road, we conceived of an enterprise model, but we had a company come to us that was like, I need your enterprise model now, and I'm willing to pay for it. So I kind of threw out a price, and they're like, yeah, cool. And I realized that I left too much money on the table because they bought it too early. And then a few weeks later, actually, that was our first customer. They were called CardStar. Um, the second customer was Rula Law. They called me out of the blue a little bit because we'd started to publish results about what was going on in mobile apps, iPhone versus Android metrics, state of BlackBerry App Store. And so we were getting a little bit of publicity. Rula Law called me up to chat. We gave them sort of the quick pitch, and they asked me what the price was. I doubled the price from what I charged CardStar, and they're like, "Yep, done. We're gonna buy this." I'm like, "Shit, I left too much money on the table." And so that those two are our first enterprise customers. And from there, we were able to get customers in that, the next year, like Wall Street Journal, Fox. There was with Fox, there was a product they were starting called the Daily, which was like their daily newspaper. Rupert Murdoch was really heavily involved. They became a really key customer of ours as well. It didn't succeed ultimately as a business, but they really helped us sort of work out the product and get something to the market that worked. And from there, a lot of media companies, retailers, and eventually financial services companies became our kind of core audience.
Fantastic. Do you remember the invoice number to the first customer?
First customer was $295 a month. So the second one was $595 a month. And then the next customer, which happened to be, I'll just say it was a magazine company based in New York. I quoted them, tried to double it again. I said $12.95 a month, and they were like, "No, that's." And so I'm like, "Okay, I guess we went back down to sort of somewhere in the middle, around $8.95, and that was the price for like the next 2 years for our enterprise
There
service."
there you go.
My god, at that point, I wasn't too worried about, like, the actual, number. It was like, show validation, skin in the game, and you can grow with them.
I think there's a great lesson in here to share, right? Like price discovery, there's a few ways to do it, right? You can come from the bottom up to find your ceiling. You can come from the top down to kind of say, hey, like you're too small for us. We can't support you. And depending on context and situation, you know, people obviously need to throw something out there and discover the
Yeah.
price. And I find sometimes people spend too much time with analysis paralysis. Like we'll do a big study on it, and I'm like, what's the harm in asking for a big number? Like if you don't ask for the big number, you have no chance in getting it. And maybe this is my experience over time saying always leaving money on the table.
Yeah. I think, especially as you're getting into it and you've got some sustainable value, you've got a lot of options, that makes sense. There's a piece in the beginning where I was like, I just need people to pay anything so that it shows that they're willing to monetize it and go through the company's contract process to make that happen. In sort of like further in my career, I realized that there's a little bit of a middle ground, right? Which is just really talk to the customer about, and then maybe this is standard, like, for if you're a sales leader, those are like obvious stuff, right? It's like talk to your customer about the value that they're going to get from it. and what they feel the right budget is, what they're able to cut a check for,
Yeah.
right? And, work with them to figure out the right starting point. And then if you find, if you create value, you can continue to grow from there.
This is super interesting because people have always perceived pricing based on value, and that has value is a very,
Sure.
whatever you define it as. And I think what's happening now in a lot of the AI based
Mhm.
tooling is people saying, we're not going to pay for SaaS traditional things. We're going to pay for outcomes. Well, the
Yeah.
outcome is just the shifting of the value equation.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, if you're going to shift it to an outcome that's probability based, the prices are going to be different.
Yeah.
What I've uncovered is some people are like, "Yeah, okay, show me, no problem," and others are like, "Well, we can't do that. We gotta go back to the the other pricing
I
models."
think the other problem with the outcome based right now is that, look, the LLMs are coming at this hard and fast, right? And so if you do something from a customer's perspective, you do something that's outcome based, like, wait, what's going to prevent me from being able to do this myself in the down the road? And therefore, like, am I giving away too much value to you to create that outcome? And it's a confusing place right now. So look, everybody's figuring out pricing. There's no like maybe right answer because it's there's so many uh things that depends, but I feel like we're still like some of the fundamentals of like, hey, there's a price that's keyed off of something, whether it's consumption, whether it's number of employees or people using it,
Yeah.
or something that sort of makes sense to both parties and tracks to maybe not directly to like the value they're getting, but loosely at least.
And I'd love to get your take, and I'll give my leading answer first, but, like, how do you get enterprise pricing in the world of AI? And there's this one world where it's the way it was, there's another world where it's outcome based that we're talking about. And what's changing very quickly is, as I've observed, is people's authority levels to sign off on things used to have very defined numbers as you went up
Yeah.
the org chart, and those numbers all crumbled and are
Yep.
having to get rebuilt back up to reasonable numbers. So it's just been interesting to navigate. So for all those out there in the similar kind of grind and hustle, it's like, who are you asking? Who's the buyer? All the classic thing? Who's the fox? Like all of these types of things, whatever your analogy is for
Yeah.
sales. But understanding whose name is on the contract and whose budget it's coming from still is important, and what their thresholds are still very. I'll throw that to you and get your take.
I mean, there's a lot of these AI pilot budgets. So getting a pilot going, look, it's not like easy because there's a lot of players going after it, but that's one thing. But going from that pilot budget to real budget, you're going through the corporate scrutiny. I think that your sort of medium-sized enterprises, call them even up to single digit billions, that process can be fairly streamlined because you can get connected to, the C-suite fairly easily on something that's AI related and high visibility. You can get sign off to at least start somewhere small. I think with the large enterprises, you're seeing them have a big debate internally about, first of all, are we going to leverage a third party to build this capability, or should we be building this internally? And they want that muscle. They worry about prices going out of control and then being beholden to something that's going to sort of surge in price after the fact. And so these are all factors that need to be worked out in a large enterprise. And there's no like clean answer. I think one of the pieces is, going away from like the direction of SaaS back to the world of like, on-prem or in your environment where you can leverage the enterprise's compute and their commitments, contracts with LLM providers and others, so they have more control over the economics, and the end result is something that they also have more control over. So,
Yeah,
I guess the TLDR on that is, I think it's different between like sort of the medium-sized enterprises, large enterprises.
yeah, for sure. Just get back into Localytics here. So over a period of time, you the company scaled and grew real nicely. I believe you were bootstrapped for most of the time, and then you flipped a switch to go raise some money. Maybe walk us through that journey, the excitement around it, the goods of it, the potential downsides you observed of it, and kind of how it played out as you worked through it.
Yeah, I think at some point we did some angel funding and stuff like that. That kind of took us through the first few years of the company. And even our first sort of institutional round was with folks. This was with Polaris folks that we'd gotten to know really well. Small round that allowed us to sort of start ramping up while we figured out what the big potential opportunity was. We had good success in those times, and we started to see the revenues growing fast, and so we had some investor demand, and we ended up raising a total of $60 million. And I think that part of the reason why we ended up raising those amounts, because we looked at our competitors that were raising even bigger amounts, and we're like, man, we got, in order to compete, we're going to need to do that. At the end of the day, what ended up happening is all of us raised too much, saturated a market that wasn't growing, was going to be big, but wasn't yet ready for that type of investment. And all of us that were kind of competing for this ended up struggling because we were just trying to throw sales and marketing dollars at it. We, as a result, would have high churn in the space, and it gave an entry to newer companies to come in and take that market. So the lesson there is like I think we did need to raise some venture money in order to build out the product in the way that we want, but we should have been really focused internally on ourselves and what our customers need and our metrics to get to the next milestone rather than what the market was doing. um, and had we done that, we would have, sort of looked at what do we really think we need over the next 2 years and raised a much smaller amount, which would have put us in a much stronger place to get through the next plateau.
It's a really tough spot for people because when you get out there and you can't control the inbound demand or interest, uh, the thing you control is what you say yes to, right? And when things when you come a hot deal like yours was for a number of years, it's like everybody just wants in. And, the wanting in, that this is just an interim milestone for the life cycle of the company. And sometimes when the accordion stretches out too quickly, right? Like
Yeah.
you end up in this like there's
Yeah.
only one path to get to the outcome here, and the optionality kind of diminishes of potential outcomes. And sometimes it's a great thing, right? Like, not having a plan B and just going for it is amazing. So that's kind of a really good thing of it. And then when the market, you can't control the market and its demands. And when it shifts quick, right? And we've all been on both ends of these things, so we see it.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about maybe the efficiency you had when you had more capital in terms of go to market or some of the other things that were very very beneficial with the extra capital.
Um, I think there's two pieces. Right? The additional we had a pretty ambitious vision on the product, right? Which wasn't just analytics, but to connect analytics to the engagement side of it, whether it was push notifications, whether it was personalization, and use sort of ML to really drive those things together. And we needed, first of all, the capital to build out the engineering team that was going to make that happen, which we were on track for. But then it was also, hey, use that capital to hire sales and marketing. And especially when you hire it kind of quickly and you have these numbers, you go after the market, and we were getting the market. We were like, great, we're hitting our sales numbers. What was hidden in the background that we didn't really get close enough to quickly enough is that a lot of those new customers that were coming in were churning quickly. We'd gone to some international markets that tend to high churn. We ended up with more startups hey, some of them are going to not be around. And so our kind of our gross retention, the growth of our accounts was actually great. But when you really dig into the net retention, it was trending in the wrong direction. And so we had to make some hard choices. First of all, stop selling to these markets that weren't that great. So we had a mid-tier product, and we had to like fire a bunch of those customers or eliminate that tier. hey, you're either going to go to enterprise or sorry. And it was painful. It was hard, right? Like, cause you're like, man, like, we're just giving up so much, but the economics weren't good on that. And we probably should have made some of those decisions even earlier.
I think it's a great lesson. Nobody ever wants to fire a customer. They're like, "They're our
Yeah.
customer. They're great." I'm like, "They're great for themselves. They're crushing you. Like, these are the wrong customers."
Yeah.
So I always kind of as you're scaling, I always have this like, there's people turnover that's voluntary and involuntary. There's customer turnover that's voluntary and involuntary, and you just have to keep both of those in check and make sure that you have the right scope around what you're doing and who you're working with.
Absolutely.
That's fascinating because people sometimes say growth at all costs, and it's like, well, you sure, right? So you just got to be mindful of that.
I was just gonna say, and there's a time perhaps for growth at all cost, right? But then, there's a time for moving towards efficiency. And part of it is picking the right investors for the right phases. Because if you are in the growth at all cost phase and you pick an investor who's used to a repeatable business, you're gonna have tension. Right. And if you are at a place where you should be moving towards that repeatability and you have an investor who's still growth at all cost mindset, you're going to have a tension. So you got to be careful, not just about the personalities and the individuals, which is obviously the most important thing, but where do they play and how do they think about, their sort of sweet spot in terms of stage of the business.
Yeah, let's maybe segue that into let's talk about the process of acquisition here.
Mhm.
Maybe kind of give us it in inbound, outbound. What was the conversation like? In the diligence, they must have been looking through a lot of this customer stuff and just kind of maybe break it down some highlights.
Yeah, so I hired a CEO at Localytics in 2017. As me and my co-founder thought about starting the next company. At that point, we brought the business to cash flow positive. Um, and so then it was like, hey, let's hand it off to someone while we support it to see if we can kind of grow to the next plateau. Um, I don't think we quite made it where we had wanted. So, we're like, hey, look, this is a good time to look at acquisition. And at that point, we hired an investment banker to help us with that process, look at all the folks out there, ended up doing the deal, closed it in March of 2020. So initially we thought, hey, this is great timing. We got out just before the pandemic. In retrospect, 6 months later, software valuations just skyrocketed. So, hey, maybe we could have done better, but couldn't predict that that what was coming.
I've never heard anybody who's chose to exit saying, I didn't, I wish we had stuck around longer. Like, but maybe there would have been a bigger dollar amount, but anybody who's had a good outcome is like, they
Yeah.
move on. I think
Yeah.
that's one of having not fast volatile memory section for experiences in life to move on.
Well, you talked about the earlier about the not having a plan B. Well, we turned down a number of pretty nice acquisition, possibilities before that because we were like, no, no, we think we're on that path towards, big company. And obviously we didn't get there. So, look, in retrospect, we might have made some different decisions, but at that moment, it was like this is what we felt was the right thing to do, given where the market was going, given our status in the market.
Yeah. Nice. Um, you talked a bit about bringing someone on after you hit like a cash flow positive moment. It's kind of the founder's gateway to someone else they brought in. Not to put you on the spot, but talk a bit about that decision and good, bad, and different at this stage.
I think it's a tough thing to decide on, and I think it's a tougher thing in retrospect to execute. Because there's just a different DNA. Somebody's got to sort of drive it, but there's a different sort of approach. So, maybe the most ideal scenario would have been a more gradual, sort of, like changing of the guard, right? Or, maybe I think about Tim Cook shadowed Steve Jobs for many years, so that once Steve wasn't there, that he could kind of continue a lot of how he thought about it. Um, so maybe in retrospect that would have been like a better way to do it rather than kind of like somebody's new, they start at in that role. But hey.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm sure anybody out there who's going through this process, data points is always helpful, and thought process and refining it is, I think, always helpful. So hopefully that's a good share for people. What was next? What did the founder path teach you, and ultimately got you to AWS? But maybe kind of walk us through the thought process and experiences.
When we our second company was acquired, it was called Demand Sage. We'd only really grown it, we'd only done a pre-seed. We decided to take a lot of what we're doing at Localytics and bring it to to SMBs. Realized that there were challenges selling into SMBs that made it hard to kind of take the data centric approach that we wanted and get the right economics of the business. So we decided to look at exit opportunities before we raised another round so that we weren't spending, the next 5 to 10 years of our lives on something that we weren't feeling was quite like, had all the right dynamics. And so we had few offers. We ended up going to Snapchat. And I think what we had decided then is after, by that point, 11 years in the startup journey, we needed a break from startups. And so I think even from then, we always said, and by we, I mean, me and my co-founder, CTO Henry, that we need a 3 to 4 year break. And uh, let's jump into Snap. Him and the rest of the team stayed at Snapchat for the next few years. I ended up leaving after a year to join AWS. And so yeah, we kind of needed that mental separation from startups. There's the pros and cons of
Yeah.
startups versus big company, but some of it was like, all right, not having quite the same level of pressure on us.
I think for folks like yourself, myself, who we've in and out of like large corporations,
Yep.
startups, I always cherish my time at the acquiring company, because it's like I'm gonna learn something new, and I'm gonna learn some good and some bad. I'm gonna learn scale at a different level. All of these things are always exciting. And then, when it stops being fun, is what I tell them. I go, when it stops being fun, it stops being fun, right? Like, and that's a both of us problem. We both didn't do it well enough, or we've kind of hit a natural end to things. It's fine.
Sure.
Um, Before we switch into some of the rapid fire stuff,
Mhm.
anything you want to tell us about your new business?
I mean, maybe I'll start with a little the AWS story, right? So in my role there, we had built out some large scale generative AI back in like even early 2023, just after ChatGPT had launched. And because of my background, took very much a data centric approach to it. So we were able to build out these things that were used by tens of thousands of people. There's some of the things that we did for the sales team there, which is tens of thousands of staff, helped AWS drive pipeline, for example, by more than 4.9% for those who were using it. So really like impactful things. But then working with our biggest customers, I saw that they were struggling. They had a lot of demos and prototypes, but very few things making it into production and having impact. And the reason was almost always that they didn't connect to their enterprise data. And, the new business is about helping, enterprise address that problem. And what I can say is we've got several Fortune 500 companies that were bringing we've already brought large scale AI in production to, and so we're excited to share that when we're ready.
Fantastic. I think it's the arc and the theme. We're excited to see it when you reveal. Maybe we'll have you back on for round two and go through it. Let's get into some rapid fire. Um, Red or white?
Red.
Red. All right. A word or phrase that describes why you keep doing this.
Stupidity. I mean, what I mean by is like, look, there's easier paths in life, but at the end of the day, this is kind of who I'm built to be.
Yeah, kind of know who you are. Okay, proudest moment of your career.
There was a time at Localytics where I realized that the organism that we built was sort of doing its own thing without needing me. So, for example, they were organizing like a hackathon that was like had some incredible stuff. I had no involvement in it. I was just there to watch and judge, and it was like, holy crap, we built something that even without my involvement is doing great things, and that was a proud moment.
Amazing. Advice for first time founders you wish you had.
It's a roller coaster. You could have the best day ever in the morning and the worst day ever in the afternoon. Maybe it's the best day again later in the day based on the conversation you're having. You just got to be ready for that. But look at the long-term trajectory and don't let sort of the little bounces and stuff get you either too down or too excited, right? Just focus on that, where you're going along as a trajectory.
Amazing. You have a very, very cool entrepreneurs circle in your local area. Some really great people in there. Um, Advice for somebody to get invited to meet such a group.
Uh, just show up with the people that are involved, and kind of show them what you're working on. You probably start with getting advice, right? Like I think most entrepreneurs are happy to give advice to to founders, and so through that process, you get to know each other, and then it's like, all right, this person would be a great fit, not just because we might get something from them, they might get something from us. It's just equally important that you feel like you're going to be able to give to that person. So is that process of like getting advice is a good way to start relationships.
That's really important. I think for entrepreneurs out there and founders, there's this whole local community of people who are not only wanting to, but love talking to other entrepreneurs, sharing insights, sharing advice, receiving insights. It's kind of a pay it forward two-way street for everybody. So if you can find those in your community, I know your community does a great job. You should get involved. And lastly, your favorite thing outside of work.
In the summer, it's biking, and just being out there, fresh air, hopefully with the family, and roaming around, finding new places to visit. In the winter, something I don't do enough these days, but it's snowboarding. So I just still feel like, uh, you know, getting out there on the hill, getting a little bit of adrenaline where it's risky enough that I have to be thinking about what I'm doing.
Yeah,
Keeps my mind clear and gives me a sort of a nice, almost meditative experience.
fantastic. Well, Raj, it's been an absolute pleasure, obviously knowing you through the years, but sharing the time and sharing the experiences with folks. So thank you for the insights.
Appreciate it. Really good to talk to you, Emma, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Cheers.